This is the Monday, April 6, 2020 episode of Stand Up. Here are your numbers on coronavirus and news. Total confirmed cases as of 10:30 p.m. Eastern Sunday, 1,273,990. Total deaths, 69,444. Total recoveries, 260,247. Total recoveries. In the U.S., total confirmed cases, 337,310. Total deaths, 9,637. Total recoveries, 17,461. Of course, none of those numbers are anywhere close to what is actually the truth. That's just what's being reported. The Surgeon General says this week will be our Pearl Harbor or our 9/11 moment. The USDA confirms that a Bronx zoo tiger tested positive for coronavirus. Trump said that they have no contingency plan for the Republican National Convention. Biden said the DNC may hold a virtual convention. The governor of New York said the state is literally going day to day with supplies. Queen Elizabeth urged the British people to confront pandemic with self-discipline and resolve. The Prime Minister of UK is in the hospital, and much, much more. It's time to stand up. Should we do this? Let's do this. Hey guys, happy Monday. How was your weekend? Did you go out to a show? Maybe you went to the theater or the ball game? Maybe you had reservations at your favorite restaurant. Maybe you did none of those things because life is on pause, everybody. So what did you do? I had a great weekend because I was outside in the garden and puttering around my house and exercising and doing my best to keep busy. I have an awesome show for you today. Reminder, can't do it without your paid subscription on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick. We have over 500 paying subscribers. What should we do together? We should do something, that community. I'm open to your suggestions. I'm going to put up a post on Patreon and ask you for your suggestions of what this amazing community of inspired, anxious, hilarious, passionate, thoughtful people can do. Joining me now is one of those people in my life. My dad, he is set to join me every Monday show. At least this is the second show in a row. Chisel D, just up outside Syracuse, New York, sheltering in place with my mom. You may hear from her as well. And, hey, Dad.
Hey, Pete. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining me for the Monday episode of Stand Up. How was your weekend? I heard you went for a bike ride.
Went for a bike ride today, and yesterday I DVR'd bowling and golf. And getting into bowling and golf. Not a lot of NASCAR on right now. And then these are, the bowling is live. They're still bowling. And what they do is they have bowling tournaments with no people there. And they're just the bowlers, which, because they keep their distance. And then I saw the 2019 PBR World Championship. PBR stands for Professional Bull Riding, not Pabst Blue Ribbon. And went for a ride today. So I've got about 8 hours of DVR bowling and golf all set for this week. So looking forward to that.
Wow, I have a lot of questions already. But just real quick, didn't you, when you were a young man, have a job at a bowling alley?
Yes, I did. I was 18 years old, and I was the guy who took care of the pin setters. There was I think 16 of them, and I would go back there and watch and make sure they didn't break down. And if they did, I was the guy who fixed them right on the spot.
And how long did you do that?
For one winter, that was enough of that shit.
What was the best story you had from being a pin setter at a bowling alley?
We did have an incident once where a young guy I was working with, he tried to fix the machine by sticking his head in the side of it, and the machine came down on his head. Oh, and it kind of crushed him a little bit. Was he okay after that, or no? He was cut up pretty bad. It tried to mash his head. He was got to make for a strange story. Yeah, that's if anything exciting ever happened, other than that, nothing ever happened.
All right, well, enough about your weekend, enough about my weekend. Let's get to the news, Dad. We want to recap the news. I know that you wanted to, first of all, a little bit of commentary about kind of a philosophical, spiritual idea about this pandemic, which is what?
Well, what if this was just part of the universe and part of We're culling the herd. There's too many people on the earth right now. Everybody says that. And what if this is a pandemic that is designed by nature to kind of put less people on the earth so that, global warming and all this other stuff that's going on, it's kind of a counter for that. And that was a horrible thought I had probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, when you have your worst thoughts. And then I woke up this morning, I says, well, if we get a vaccination, it's going to end this whole thing. So hopefully we'll get that done. And, but I think everything's under control because our president said we've got 29 million pills, but a lot of pills. We got 29 million pills.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of those pills, but if you take that and you take Zithromax, then, you should, we want the doctors and the nurses to take that stuff because, then they'll be okay.
Right.
And, he's made some quotes that are just magnificent.
I got one for you here. Are you ready? Here's the president over the weekend.
People gain from wearing a mask, and why are you opposed to wearing one yourself?
Well, I just don't want to wear one myself. It's a recommendation. They recommend it. I'm feeling good. I just don't want to be doing, I don't know, somehow sitting in the Oval Office behind that beautiful Resolute desk, the great Resolute desk. I think wearing a face mask as I greet presidents, prime ministers, dictators, kings, queens. I don't know. Somehow, I don't see it for myself. I just maybe I'll change my mind, but this will pass, and hopefully it'll pass very quickly. Now, with that being said, if somebody wants to, most people can just make something out of a certain material. So it's very well designated. It's very simple to do. I won't be doing it personally. It's a recommendation. Okay.
There you go, Dad. He just doesn't want to wear a mask when he's greeting kings and queens and so on, even though he's not greeting any heads of state. He's not. They're not coming to see him, and I don't think he ever greets queens anyway. But
I've got a thought on that. What I just heard. As I call him the AIC, which is the asshole in charge.
Right.
So what if he's behind his beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Resolute desk, and a prince, because he said he meets dictators, a prince or a king or whatever from Saudi Arabia came in and shook his hand, and he died from coronavirus. The guy is behind his beautiful Resolute desk. And the other thing one of the other quotes I heard him say was that they're working under a model.
Oh, yeah.
And then he went on to say,
I got that one. Hold on. Let me play it.
That's beautiful.
Right,
that's a quote that for the ages.
This is good or bad.
Thousands of people are going to die. You know what I want to do? I want to come way under the models. The professionals did the models. I was never involved in a model, but at least this kind of a model. But you know what? Hundreds of thousands of people, they say,
I was never involved with the models, at least this kind of model. Dad?
I think that's terrific, isn't it? He goes from talking about thousands of people dying to make a joke that he's never worked under this kind of model. The guy is an absolute pig. And, I don't care how conservative you are. I don't care how much you stick up for him. You can't go along with that kind of talk from the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, who's shown that he has absolutely no leadership skills whatsoever. He gets up there and quotes numbers and figures and says how great he's doing. We're doing this great. We're doing that great. And meanwhile, people are dying, and he's up there hamming it up, making jokes about who he is and how he does things. He doesn't have to wear a mask. He hasn't worked under at least that kind of model. The guy's a pig. He should just go away.
Wow. How do you really feel?
No, I feel worse than that, actually. I'm more upset about this dickhead than that. That's putting everything down.
This will make you feel better. Did you hear the Queen? Speaking of queens.
What Queen?
The Queen. Queen Elizabeth. You didn't hear that she spoke today?
Geez, I missed that one. I don't spend a lot of time.
Well, then we'll get your.
Yeah.
Well, you're too busy watching bowling and fishing.
Well, I'd rather. I don't know what she's got to say, but I'm sure it was more fun than what she's got.
Let's.
What is she, like 100 now? How old is that lady?
Can you hear this?
I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging.
Yes, come through.
Don't interrupt the Queen,
time.
I'm sorry.
A time of disruption in the life of our country. A disruption that has brought grief to some, financial difficulties to many and enormous changes to the daily lives of us all. I want to thank everyone on the NHS frontline, as well as care workers and those carrying out essential roles, who selflessly continue.
You know, Dad, let's just contrast that. That's the Queen, of course.
Yeah.
Here's
Thousands of people are going to die.
You know what I want to do? I want to come way under the models. The professionals did the models. I was never involved in a model. But at least
never involved in a model. It's this kind of model. Here's the Queen.
Outside the home, in support of us all. I'm sure the nation will join me in assuring you that what you do is appreciated, and every hour of your hard work brings us closer to a return.
Now she went on for 3 more minutes, Dad. She gave a speech of, she addressed the nation for about 4 minutes, the Queen.
Well, very honestly, Pete, there's 2 people in the world. Well, there's probably more than that, but of the top, the Queen of England and the President of the United States are 2 people that I just don't want to hear from. But on the other hand, yes, what she said was very concise. And those who follow Trump would say he is saying the same thing. But then she didn't probably go on to make a joke about it.
No.
Especially putting herself on top of everybody else, or, you know, as if she's higher and better than the rest of the world. But I don't know, the Queen and the president, you know.
Well, the Prime Minister of the UK has gone to hospital. He's in the hospital now, Boris Johnson.
Yeah, that's quote unquote, that's Trump's good friend. I heard that today. I just caught the tail end of that. My good friend is going in the hospital, he said.
I've got to get to my first guest, Paul Rieckhoff, Dad. Okay. But what any parting thoughts, any aspiring thoughts for people to care as they go into this next week of sheltering in place, of fear and anxiety? What do you tell them to do at 3 a.m. when they wake up with those kind of fears and anxieties? What do you?
Well, in my case, I rolled over and hugged your mom.
Oh boy,
I don't want anybody else doing that.
Well, fair enough.
You know, that's fair enough. But I really seriously. I'd like to say we're going to get through this, but I don't know what the hell's going to happen. I have no idea. But I think that in the end, there's going to be a vaccination. I think we're going to, hopefully, those of us who are still around and still healthy will be okay. But it's a good time to just connect with people. You know what I've been doing? Every once in a while, I'll pick up the phone and call somebody I haven't talked to in a long time.
Yeah.
And I have long conversations with them because they haven't heard from me. I haven't heard from them. And I know exactly what they're doing, which is nothing. They're hanging around doing nothing. So am I. So I have like a 20-minute, half an hour conversation with some, guys that I haven't seen or heard from in a while, 5 or 6 years, 2 years, whatever. And we just bullshit, And it's not a bad thing to do. Just connect. Thanks,
right.
Pete.
Love you, Pop.
Love you.
Thank you very much. There goes my dad. And on Saturday morning, I was on my friend Ali Velshit's program, Velshi, at about 8 a.m., and we were talking about the economic effect and the checks that are or are not going out and other issues. I wanted to strike the chord that we need to take care of those who are the most vulnerable, so I used my airtime to talk about that. Here it is.
Pete, Dominick, again, the human side of this, because you've been talking to people. There's these $1,200 checks. There's unemployment insurance that's going to increase. It may take 5 months to get these checks. So if anybody needs one, go to the IRS site and put in your banking information, because if you wait for a check, it could actually take 5 months to get a $1,200 check. Pete, real lives lived. These are people who are now going to have to make choices about a mortgage, a car payment, groceries, their kids' education. This is again, it's as inconceivable as the numbers.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we focus on the most vulnerable populations. People that are living on the edge aren't living on the edge because of any choices that they made, of course, Ali Velshi. The poor people are working harder than anybody else in the world. I've been working with anti-poverty organizations for a long time, as well as food insecurity issues. And you talk to people at organizations like whyhunger.org, and they will explain to you that there are people right now, living on the edge. I have 2 fridges at my house and a pantry closet full of food. I'm not going to say it's very good, and I'm not going to say I'm very good at making it. But we need to look at the most vulnerable populations right now who are living on the edge that don't have the luxury, Ali Velshi, of, as I'm sure Bill will tell you, another day. We need to get them food right now.
Yep.
Read Catherine Rampell in the Washington Post, who says that the Agriculture Department needs to reduce the cumbersome paperwork requirements for food banks and food pantries. You do this after natural disasters. They need to do it right now to get as many people food as quickly as possible. And Congress needs to pass phase 4 of coronavirus relief legislation that increases the maximum value of food stamp benefits for the most vulnerable people right now.
All right, there's just a little bit of part of my appearance on MSNBC yesterday, and of course, food insecurity and food pantries and food stamps and healthy, nutritious food is the most important thing that we can do right now today. So look at organizations in your local community that you can support any way that you can, with your time, with your money, with your signal boosting on social media, or just keeping them in mind. I always like to plug whyhunger.org, as I did there. Read Catherine Rampell's piece in the Washington Post. Now let's get to my first guest. It's Paul Rieckhoff, formerly of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans America. Coming up later on, I've got Michael Cohen of the Boston Globe, and I called Barry Ritholtz while he was eating dinner and shot the shit with him, and I figured, why not tape it and share it with you? So, right now, let's start it off with Paul Rieckhoff. All right, joining me now is the founder and former executive director of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, IAVA.org. He is also an Iraq War combat veteran. He was in the U.S. Army. He is the author of an awesome book called Chasing Ghosts. He's the founder and president now of Righteous Media and host of the amazing and excellent Angry Americans podcast. If you aren't listening to it yet, add it right now. Ladies and gentlemen, at Paul Rieckhoff, my old friend, who is harder to get on the show than Henry Winkler.
Tell me the Henry Winkler story.
I just reached out to him and said, "Can you do the show?" And he said, "Yes." Rieckhoff.
That seems like a low bar. I mean, the reality is I'm not famous, but I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old in a fucking Manhattan apartment in the middle of the pandemic. So my life is not my own, bro. Like I'm dying to do this show, but I haven't really had time to take a piss in about the last 4 weeks.
Plus, your son keeps punching you in the balls, so it's almost intimidating.
It's unbelievable. I mean, I'll share this with your audience. He's 4 years old. He's doing great in general with the whole pandemic end of the world thing, but he's a little cooped up. And when dinner time rolls around, if I don't feed him immediately, his growing body starts to turn into a some kind of hybrid beast mode thing. And he realizes now that punching me directly in the balls is extremely effective. And he does it. And he's got a great right straight hand, and it hurts like a motherfucker.
He's a good man. I'm
really killing me. It's the worst part of my pandemic, man.
If I could Venmo him cash for every time.
There's a lot of people who've been hoping to do that for a long time, man.
Tons to talk with you about. I'm psyched to finally get you on the show. But before we get to all things pandemic and as you call him, President Mayhem, and talking a little bit about your podcast, you started the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America organization. In case people don't know, what is that organization? Why did you start it? And what is its what function does it serve today?
So it's the leading advocacy and support organization for the post 9/11 generation of veterans. So we were the next generation of the VFW or the American Legion for all the men and women who served after 9/11. It's about 3 million of them. So we were really the leader since 9/11 in advocating for that community on everything from the GI Bill to VA care to mental health to expansion of care for women. We were bipartisan, and we brought together over 500,000 members and created this thing that's now, a real important leader on the landscape. You've been great in bringing attention to our work for over a decade. And it's a really important, vital organization. I did it because I was pissed off, because I got back from Iraq and it felt like we were at war and everybody else was at the mall. There's a lot of parallels to what's happening now, how I feel about New York, maybe versus other parts of the country. But we were pissed off, and my guys weren't getting the care they needed, and nothing existed, so we created it. And the old veterans organizations were bricks and mortars, and we had Facebook, and we got it cooking, and we got a lot done. And now Jeremy's taken over the organization. I think you've had him on your shows before. Awesome. Yeah, he's doing a great job and taking the baton from where I left.
What are some of the accomplishments that occurred under your watch there at IAVA?
I mean, I know this sounds kind of maybe easy, but like the actual establishment of the organization itself, something that would be there forever, and now will be there for that generation forever, in the same way the Vietnam Veterans of America is, decades later, I think is really important. Just for our community to know we've got a watchdog. We've got somebody who's going to advocate for them. Right now, they're advocating, during the coronavirus, to ensure that the National Guardsmen who are getting deployed get cared for, that they're getting adequate equipment, that they're getting adequate training, that they're getting paid, like basic shit. So the fact that organization exists and will exist forever, I think, is really, really important. And then the biggest one is the GI Bill. Over almost 2 million people have gone to school in the GI Bill now. It's changed a generation in terms of their trajectory for them and their families. And I think that's really our most proud legacy. But to know that this organization is right there now holding the VA secretary accountable, holding the Secretary of Defense accountable, holding Trump accountable, or trying to, is really, really important, especially in a time when folks are probably not thinking especially about Iraq and Afghanistan right now, much less our military. They will think about our military a lot more now that they're setting up field hospitals in cities around the country. But I think that often gets lost, and you need somebody to hold that mantle.
You continue to advocate for veterans now with your podcast, with your media entity, and everybody should listen to that. Angry Americans. You continue to obviously go on all the cable networks, and you've been really, really fired up lately talking about the military's role and the way that the military has been treated. But first of all, how are members of the military doing in terms of getting their own health care treatment if they contract or think they've contracted coronavirus?
Bad. It's fucked up. The Department of Defense has been totally flat-footed on this. And my whole thing is this. Look, coronavirus is the fight of our time. Maybe it's our world war. It's definitely the biggest thing that we faced in our lifetime, we may ever face in our lifetime. And in America, there are two forces that can help fight the coronavirus and help the American people more than anything else. And the first is the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, the military, and the other is the Department of Veterans Affairs. And because of Trump's ineffectiveness, because of his incompetence, because of his delays, those two agencies were not pushed into the fight. They weren't pushed into the fight to help the American people, and they weren't pushed in the fight to help themselves. So as a great example right now, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, the aircraft carrier in the South Pacific, has been taken completely out of the fight, offline. And when the Captain Crozier stepped forward to raise issues about the fact that his people weren't getting testing, weren't getting quarantine, weren't getting taken care of, he got fired. So I think that underscores that people throughout the military right now are concerned. They feel like they're not getting taken care of. They're still having formations and trainings. And only today, as we record this on Sunday, did the Secretary of Defense finally tell them to start wearing masks and separate. Only now. So the Department of Defense is not leading. They should be leading. They should be the forward edge of every press conference, every helicopter, every logistical dump. But instead, they're behind, and they're caught in the politics between Trump and the troops. And too often, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, somebody who most people don't know about, sides with Trump and politics instead of the troops. He continues to let us down. And that's, in this case, going to cost people their lives.
Yeah, the last time where you were really passionate and on TV a lot, I remember, was talking about this case with the Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, Paul. He was pardoned of war crimes by President Trump, Eddie Gallagher. And the Secretary of the Navy, Spencer, I think his name was relieved of his command or fired as well for being against that. And so he pardons and rewards a war criminal, and he fires this commander of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, who I think now news report says has contracted the virus himself, if I'm not mistaken. How do you look at the juxtaposition or the paradox of the raising up and pardoning a war criminal and firing a hero?
This is peak President Mayhem. I call him President Mayhem because Trump is like the guy from the Mayhem commercials. He's fucking up your house. He's fucking up the car. He's fucking up the whole country. He is President Mayhem. Every press conference, every issue he has to tackle, whether it's war criminals or a pandemic, he's fucking it all up. And I think we have to recognize that it all stems from his failure in leadership. And the basic point here on the Department of Defense is if you don't stand with Trump, you get fired. So we're down to not just like the third string or fourth string, Pete. We're down to like the fifth string, sixth string. We had General Mattis at the beginning. Okay, he's gone. Remember him? He quit a long time ago. It was almost it was December, a year and 3 months ago now that he left. Okay, and now we're way down into a guy who's running the Secretary of Defense, who used to be a Raytheon lobbyist. Okay, and then you mentioned it, the Secretary of the Navy is gone. So his second string guy, Modley, is now a political operative who's in charge. So we're so far down the food chain, and Trump has now made it clear that if you buck him, you're gone. So in a wartime effort, that's what Trump keeps calling it, and I think that's actually right. To say we need to be a country at war against this virus is right. We not only are firing somebody like Captain Crozier, a heroic guy who leads a battleship and takes care of his troops, we're elevating Jared Kushner. Right? So you get rid of an admiral and you put Jared Kushner in front of the American people. That's the apex. That's the problem here, because the Department of Defense not only needs to take care of our troops, they're going to take care of you. You live in New York. They're setting up field hospitals. They're going to be running the Javits Center. They're going to be testing for medical support. So that the Secretary of Defense should be the first guy in to say, hey, this is endangering our national defense. It's literally killing the American people. Right? Coronavirus is killing more Americans than ISIS ever did. And the Department of Defense should have been first, but it's one of the areas I think Trump has been most egregious on. He didn't activate the Defense Department. He should have done what he's doing now 3 months ago, and then we wouldn't be losing Americans and we wouldn't be vulnerable. Because right now the North Koreans are shooting off rockets again. ISIS is celebrating. They're just going to sit and watch us burn down from the outside, and we're killing ourselves in ways the enemy never could have imagined.
When you say that you should have activated the Defense Department long ago, what exactly should be the role of the Department of Defense? What should the military be doing?
They should be leading the entire national response, in my view. Okay, it should be coordinated through the president. We've talked about the Defense Powers Act. So the president should have a national strategy. What's the goal? Beat coronavirus. Help the American people. How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to start with the Secretary of Defense. He's going to deploy the entire military. That's going to be what you see with the USS Comfort and Mercy, the ships, the hospital ships in New York and L.A. It should be that on steroids. You could have field hospitals weeks ago. You could have the military running tests weeks and months ago. The National Guard was deployed into New Rochelle, New York, I think about a month ago. Okay, that's what Governor Cuomo did because the president didn't send federal troops. So this is not just about, guys who kick in doors and carry guns. This is people who run hospitals. This is people who do logistics. This is people who can go door to door searching for old people, right? They can do everything, and they're organized, they're disciplined, and they're waiting for orders. And they didn't really get those orders, Pete, until like 3 weeks ago. And that's maybe, I think, the biggest failure of our national defense in our lifetime. And the failure for our troops, I wrote this on Twitter today, I think the betrayal of our troops, the failure of the president and the Secretary of Defense to take care of our troops, their basic health, is the biggest betrayal since Vietnam.
Wow.
I mean, they are betraying the shit out of them, right? They're saying, okay, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. It's like telling the American people that we're winning in Vietnam. We're not. Like our troops are dying, in the fight. A National Guardsman from New Jersey died yesterday. More will die, and they're exposed and they're compromised. And that is really, I think, the most utter betrayal we can have. If you can't keep them healthy, it's like sending them into war with no body armor. And that's what we did in Iraq when I went over, and that's what we're doing again with coronavirus.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison. The body armor issue. What did Rumsfeld say? You go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you.
Yeah, but he didn't go to war, right? Like he sat in Washington in an air-conditioned office, and my ass went to war, right? And my guys didn't have body armor, and they didn't have vehicles. And similarly, here at home, the frontline fighters that are outside my door right now, I'm in Lower Manhattan. You'll see fire trucks go by. You'll see ambulances go by. The fire department in New York does not have masks. The ambulance drivers don't have equipment that they need. That's just like 9/11 all over again. We said never forget, but I'm getting reports every day from my friends who are firefighters that they don't have basic equipment. So, this all, in my view, goes back to Trump. But in the meantime, we've got to adapt, improvise, and overcome at the state level, at the city level, at the community level, and do what we can. Because if the cavalry's not coming, we got to take care of ourselves.
Well, I'm glad that you're out there. You are part of the cavalry, and I think I've heard you compare this, or maybe you just did touch on it here. You served in combat in the Iraq War, and so have thousands of your friends. And I wonder how you see this battle that we're in right now. Do you look at those working on the front lines in terms of the healthcare workers and others who are, put in harm's way that could easily contract this virus? How do you compare them to combat veterans?
This is war. I think this is what war feels like. This is what war looks like. I think it is the closest thing we've ever had to a true world war, maybe, since the last plague, right? In modern times, there's never been a common enemy that could unite the entire world and take potentially millions or tens of millions of lives. This is a world war. I mean, outside of Independence Day happening and aliens coming down from outer space, this is the closest we're going to get to a true world war, and we've got it. And I think we have to recognize that the objective should be clear. It should be kill the virus, right? That should kill the enemy, get rid of it, right? Protect our people, come together, and then rebuild for a brighter future, something like that. Like, that's the basic mantra that we should hear from the president. We're not hearing it from him. We heard it from the Queen of England today, but we're not, who's someone who knows about war, someone who had to give an address to the nation in 1940 when the bombings were happening. So I think there is a real call to arms that should be focused on the enemy, the likes of which we've never seen, and the devastation, the likes of which we've never seen. The fear that people fear, right? I said this to a couple friends. Civilians have said to me, man, this is fucked up. Man, this is weird. I said, welcome to combat. This is combat. Every time you step outside your house, it feels like you're stepping outside the wire. And those people who are stepping outside their houses, who are going into the fight, who are fighting the virus, who are saving our friends, they are, in my view, combat veterans. I can hear a helicopter over my head right now. The only helicopter overhead right now is an FDNY or an NYPD or a military helicopter. All the civilian helicopters are grounded. And I really do think we have to recognize that we have to be on war footing, and you have to brace yourself for a long war. I think this could go on for a long time, and you got to brace yourself for it. If it ends early, great. We'll have a big party at Pete's house, and we'll pop this big bottle of champagne behind me that we've been saving for that moment. But in the meantime, in the military,
wait to get you in my above ground pool.
Yeah, I love it, man. I'm all about that. But you prepare for the worst, right? Military planning requires what we call the MDCOA, the most dangerous course of action. You plan for the worst. And if the worst doesn't happen, okay, great. Then we're ready for the next level but in front of that. But the president has completely failed. And the way he was asleep on the watch was just like Bush falling asleep on 9/11. Right? When they say they didn't know the pandemic was coming, it's like folks saying, they didn't know who bin Laden was. Our intelligence agency knew who they were. We knew this was hitting China. They were asleep at the switch, and now potentially hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Americans will die. So that's how high the stakes are. And I think the sooner we wrap our head around it, Pete, the better we'll be, because I think there's two kinds of people right now. People who know we're at war and people who don't. The people who are taking this seriously and want to be a part of this fight, and the people who are hanging out in Brooklyn in a park or going to church on Sunday because they think that it's not a big deal. They're going to find out the hard way. It is a big deal, and it's very real.
What would you say to folks about how to deal with it, how to prepare, how to cope? When you were in combat in Iraq, you were a young man, I guess in your early mid-20s. Now you're very old, and you have kids, little kids, and they're vulnerable. I mean, you weren't a father then; you're a father now. And how do you deal with this? How do you cope with this situation, which is so scary and creating such angst for so many? Especially in New York.
I think it starts with understanding the objective, right? And for us, we actually wrote down a mission for our family, and it was Operation Happy Family, okay? And we want to get through this time, and our goal is to have a healthy, happy, thriving, growing family. And every decision we make is in support of that goal. Whether it's what we have for dinner or whether or not we go for a walk with a 1-year-old in downtown Manhattan, every decision we make as a family is in support of that goal.
Well, it doesn't sound like your 4-year-old's gotten the memo, the way he's beating the hell out of your nutsack.
He's a bit of a renegade, right? Just like in any
Operation Happy Family.
But, we talk to them in ways that are clear, that are honest, that are obviously, age appropriate as best we can, but age appropriate's out the window now. But I think we brace them for the fact that these are going to be hard times, but it's very important. And here's what you can do. Right. And what we explain to the kids and what I explain to anyone is this is truly a unified effort, and we all have a role to play. Some of us are frontline nurses who are running into Brookdale Hospital. Some of us just need to stay the fuck home. Right. Like, stay the fuck home. Don't get grandma sick. Don't cough on people at ShopRite. Right. And do your part. And that's the opportunity. And if you have extra time and you don't want to watch the 9th episode of Netflix for the day, then sew some masks or go get educated or spread some good information or convince a stupid person that COVID-19 is real. Like, there's something everybody can do. But I think it also comes down to Pete making the most out of every day. We wake up every day. We say today is going to be a good day. We still celebrate birthdays. We still celebrate Fridays. And we brace ourselves for the fact that this is not just a snow day. This is a new normal. And I'm worried, frankly, about the world my kids are going to grow up in, but I want them to be prepared for it. And that starts with transparency and candor, but also the unity of the family, man. Like, you got to stick together. We got to care for our communities, and we're all in it together more than we've ever been in our whole life.
Yeah, I hope everybody gets that memo and feels that way, for sure. But sometimes it feels like America just doesn't understand that culture of kind of collectivism, of solidarity. You know, you get that as a veteran, and a lot of athletes understand that. But sometimes people just think that it's all about themselves. But in this case, it's so obvious that that's not the case because of this being a virus. Anybody is vulnerable to this virus. Anybody, and so we have to work together to prevent each other from getting it. So.
But it feels like, Pete, if I can, it feels a lot like the post 9/11 war, right? Because there are some folks who are doing 16 tours, and there are other folks who are just watching the Kardashians all the time, right? So if you live in New York City, you know this shit is real right now. If you live in Seattle, if you live in New Orleans, if you live in Detroit, other cities are starting to come online. The battlefront is coming to your town. So you might still be just going about your day-to-day. You might still be having family barbecues. But when someone in your family gets it, then it's different. And I think that wave is coming. I would love to be wrong about that, but I think the likelihood is high that wave is sweeping across this country. We're still kind of in a state of maybe not denial, but kind of celebration in some areas even, right? I think it's going to shift into a period of mourning, where people start to feel this, intimately, personally, and then that will turn into a unification and an action. But we're going to have to go through a couple phases of this, and more people are going to have to personally be impacted. When they heard Tom Hanks got it, that was like when everybody heard Pat Tillman died, right? Like, nobody knew anybody in Afghanistan. Nobody knew anybody who had served. But Pat Tillman, the NFL star, was somebody that they felt like they could relate to. That's what Tom Hanks was. He was like the Pat Tillman of the coronavirus. And now it's coming closer and closer and closer. And people, not just celebrities, people know people in their families and know people who've died. So I think that is going to come upon them in a way that is very immediate. And when you and I talk in a couple of weeks, it's going to be a totally different world, man.
I wanted to ask you just a little bit about politics, specifically as it relates to the military. I saw Soledad O'Brien asking you this question. She's been on your podcast before. But what is it about the United States military that has still a lot of them supporting this president when he clearly does not support them?
I think that's a stereotype. I think Soledad I love having this discussion with Soledad, and I had it with her on my podcast because she's the master of trying to erode stereotypes, but then she throws one on us as a military, right? That we're all just, gun-toting, Bible-thumping, Trump-loving, right-wing rednecks. You've had dozens and if not hundreds of people on your podcast and your radio show over the years, and you've seen that we're not a monolith. We're as diverse as the American public. One thing we do have that's different is we can't always speak up. So if Trump says the military supports us, it's not like everybody can go in the back and go, no, we really don't. Right. Like, they're over there fighting, right? And whoever wants to hijack us and politicize us, especially if you're the commander in chief, can do that. He's done it more than any president ever in modern history. So I think that's a lot of what's going on here. But we're a diverse population. Just like everyone else, they're critical of Trump. The most recent Military Times poll saw his popularity dropping, especially after he decided to abandon the Kurds, after he continued to attack John McCain, after he fired Jim Mattis. They're not immune to that. They watch the news, they track politics, and I think you'll see over time that as more and more of them rotate out, they'll have the ability to be more candid. But they're not a monolith. But they're often, vets, somebody told me once there's only a couple people left in America that it's okay to stereotype, right? And it was Muslims, obese people, people with mental illness, and vets. Right? Like, that's the only, for some reason, those groups are still like, it's not totally, forbidden to stereotype a fat person, right? Or even fat is probably not the right word anymore, right? Someone who's overweight. And unfortunately, it happens over and over again with Muslims. And the military often gets stereotyped, right? We're either Rambo or we're superheroes. And that, I think, does discredit to them. And it's just lazy, frankly. It's intellectually lazy.
All right. Before I let you go, appreciate that thoughtful, nuanced answer. Tell people about your podcast, Anger Americans. You've had a lot of amazing guests. You're up to what, 50 episodes?
Yeah, we just hit our 1-year anniversary, actually. So happy birthday to us. But, you've been a great mentor and friend to me over the years. So I always want to thank you for that. And I'm also inspired by this new chapter for you, man. And I'm so grateful for all that you do. But Angry Americans, we just did our 53rd episode. The bottom line is we believe if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And this is a podcast for people who care about what's going on in the country and going on in the world. I take it from an independent standpoint. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I feel like there's an angry middle that is underrepresented in the American political landscape. And we talk about with and for those folks a lot. And then we talk to iconic, important, and or inspiring Americans. So it's been Sarah Jessica Parker. It's been Ron Perlman from Sons of Anarchy. It's been Medal of Honor recipient Flo Groberg. So we've got a really diverse group of people, Meghan McCain on the right and Rachel Maddow on the left. And we've had some really engaging conversations, and it's a lot of fun. We also give people a way to turn your anger into what I call positive outcome. Everybody's a little bit angry. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. The question is, what do you do with that anger? Do you let Trump hijack it, or do you turn it into supporting our cops and firefighters and first responders? It's natural. It's a real emotion. You've been great and candid about talking about emotion. It's okay to be angry, but I want folks to know they're not alone, and there's a way to turn that into a productive outcome, and that's what really Angry Americans is all about.
Go listen to it right now. Go listen to the podcast Angry Americans. Download it, subscribe to it, follow Paul on Twitter at Paul Rieckhoff. It's an insane spelling, Rieckhoff. I mean, I've known you for over 10 years, and every time I have to spell your last name, which is daily because I journal about you, I just I can't even I can never get it right. All right, pal. Thank you very much for joining me. Keep up the great work. Congratulations on the success of Angry Americans and Righteous Media, and join me more often.
I will. Thank you for standing up for us for so long, and thank you for creating something that's making a dent in the world every day. Appreciate you very much,
All right,
man.
buddy. Thanks.
Bye.
Paul Rieckhoff, thank you very much. Always great talking with him. Definitely check out his podcast and his social media. Check him out on Instagram and Twitter. Really, and his book is really good as well. I always like to plug that, Chasing Ghosts. And if you or your loved one, family member, friend is a veteran of the Iraq or Afghanistan wars and you aren't a member of IAVA.org, you got to join up. It's a great, great organization advocating for that generation of veterans. And now let's catch up with Boston Globe columnist Michael Cohen, who is on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. You got to check out his email newsletter, which comes out every Thursday. Subscribe to that. Here's my conversation with Michael Cohen. Because everybody's having such a unique experience themselves, and even not small talk, but things that you're doing with your life, anything from making a meal to exercise.
It's interesting.
Am I right? It's interesting to hear what other people are doing?
Yeah, because there's so little to do right now. I feel that. I definitely feel that.
I see that you've been tweeting movies that you've been watching, with your kids, like 80s movies, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, as well as Home Alone. Yeah,
we did Home Alone, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I think we might do Princess Bride tonight. Trying to get out of watching the movies they like to watch, which are not so exciting for me.
I feel like it's hard to get my daughters to watch movies that we grew up with. And I feel like it's also not unique to watch a movie because they're watching shit all day long in our house.
All day long. It's all they do. It's all they want to do. So trying to get them to they love watching TV. That's all they ever want to do. So, but on the weekend, I throw the rules out the window because it's hard enough during the week for them to pay attention to their work and to stay in their friends. They deserve a little bit of fun. So,
how much are you, Mr. Speech Boy? They don't call you that, Mr. Cohen. They don't call you that, Dad. Teaching at home. How much are you teaching at home?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, my youngest is 6, and she pretty much needs. She needs me to be, working with her. It's hard to get her to work independently. So
you have to spend a lot of time doing that.
I do spend a lot of time. Yeah.
Is it rewarding in any way? Is it mostly challenging?
No, I mean, it's challenging. There's no question about that, but it's rewarding. And, but I think also, one thing that I definitely decided was I wasn't going to do everything. I think I figured out pretty early on that, you can only do so much. You do what you can do. And I have to do my job. So it's hard to, do all of that stuff and do my job. So it's exhausting.
What you mean by that is no math.
No, actually, a lot of math, because I like doing math, and they're good at math, actually. They're both good at math. So that makes it a lot easier.
The great Michael Cohen joining me, and I can talk with you and anybody really about just how your life has changed or how it is temporarily where it is right now. But I definitely want to talk with you, of course, about your most recent column at the Boston Globe, which is titled, Dear Bernie Sanders, Enough Already. And I feel like you might have already written this column back in 2016 with
multiple times, yeah.
What are the parallels between what happened in 2016 Democratic primaries when Hillary and Bernie were the last two remaining, and now when it's Biden and Bernie? What are the similarities?
It's the Yogi Berra lines, deja vu all over again. I mean, it's the same. In 2016, it was pretty obvious by April he was not going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. Everyone knew it. He didn't have a path to the nomination, but he wouldn't quit. He stayed in the race, and he attacked Clinton pretty harshly. He tried to convince super delegates to support him over her, even though she had a majority of the delegates. So it was sort of like he wouldn't let it go until the convention. And I think everyone hoped that this time things would be different, that we have a pandemic and Biden has done so well and Sanders underperforming that this would be, he would be done. And here we are. There's an election on Tuesday and he's not going to raise. And it's just he can't let it go, it seems.
So at this point, lay it out for us, Michael Cohen, in terms of the delegates and what, if anything, Bernie Sanders could hope to achieve, because he is apparently staying in the race in hopes that he can get concessions from Joe Biden. What concessions would he want, and does he have any ground to stand on to be demanding them?
I mean, I don't know what ground he has on to demand concessions, frankly. I mean, Biden has embraced some of Elizabeth Warren's proposals on student debt. But if Sanders wants, for example, Biden to embrace Medicare for all, that's not going to happen. It just isn't going to happen. Biden is not a supporter of Medicare for all. It is a political loser for Democrats, and he's not going to do it. And other than that, I don't know what Sanders is hoping to achieve with any of this. Look, my view of this has been from the beginning, this is not about policy. It's not about some meaningless, sentences in a party platform that no one's going to read. It is about Bernie Sanders wants to be president of the United States. That is his ambition. And he, I think when he, after the Nevada caucus, it looked like he might be the nominee. And then things fell apart, 4 days later when he went to the South Carolina primary, or a week later, the South Carolina primary. And I think he's having a hard time giving up the fact that he's not going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party.
Why can't the dynamics of the pandemic change the conversation around health care because of the weaknesses that it lays bare, which allows Joe Biden maybe to come to a Medicare for all or something similar to what Bernie has been trying to sell for almost a generation? But,
I wrote about this a few weeks ago. The issue is not – I don't think that the pandemic actually suggests that we need Medicare for all. I think the pandemic suggests that we need more investment in public health. And, in this country, we tend to focus on individual outcomes. We tend to focus on individual care. We don't focus on big public health issues. We don't. I could talk about. We don't focus on things like obesity. We don't focus on things like the opiate epidemic. We don't focus on things like cardiovascular disease the way that we should. And all of those things, I think, in a way, are a failure of our healthcare system beyond just, of course, the fact that some Americans don't have health insurance. I think. If you want to expand health insurance, lots of ways to do it. Medicare for all is maybe would be an ideal solution. Politically, it's a non-starter. It's just not going to happen. And I think, Biden has talked about ways to expand Obamacare. A lot of Democrats talked about that. That, I think, is the way forward as far as how do you improve access to health care. I really do think, and it's unfortunate, I think, that the pandemic, this whole coronavirus situation, I think people have focused on Medicare for all. I don't think that's the big takeaway here. I think the big takeaway is that we don't invest enough money in public health. And you're seeing the consequences of that right now.
You're outraged in your column that Bernie is still in, that he has not dropped out yet at this point. And you lay out what the remaining primaries are, Michael Cohen, and you say his best chance is Wisconsin. Tell me, again, going back to 2016 with Hillary and Bernie Sanders, what happened in Wisconsin and what is forecasted to happen in Wisconsin this week in the primaries.
The guy won by 13 points in 2016. He's losing right now. Last I saw was 15. I've seen polls that have it as high as 25 points. he is going to get destroyed in Wisconsin, as he has in every single state basically since Super Tuesday. If he can't win in Wisconsin, we won 4 years ago, where's he going to win? And he needs to win, by the way, not by 1%. He needs to win by like 20%. He needs to win about 59% of the vote in the remaining primaries to be the nominee. That's not going to happen, not in a million years.
So what is the reason then for him to stay in? How would you articulated it pretty well in this column, but it's just ego?
I think it's just ego. I think it's ambition. I think Bernie Sanders wants to be president of the United States, and he'll do anything he has to do to achieve that. I mean, I think 4 years ago you saw this. I mean, 4 years ago he said that when it was clear that Clinton had a plurality of delegates and was going to have a majority, he gave his press conference where he said super delegates should pick him because he was better bet to beat Trump. I mean, somewhat undemocratic solution, you might say. And then, of course, earlier this year, he said the opposite. He said if he had the most delegates, he should be the nominee. Exact opposite of what he said 4 years ago. Right. And what I took away from that was this is a guy who will say what he has to say because what ultimately matters to him more than anything else, I'm not saying he's a total phony. I mean, he cares about his policy issues, but he cares a lot about his ambition. He wants to be president. Every politician does. But I think the other thing with Sanders is that look at people like Buttigieg or Klobuchar or Warren. I think they realize that staying in the race would also do damage to the party. Sanders doesn't care about the Democratic Party. He never has. Not even a member of the Democratic Party. He's only cared about his own personal issues. And I think that he, 4 years ago, was willing to hurt Clinton, and he did hurt Clinton and hurt Democrats in the race against Trump. I think he is, frankly, less bothered by that than other Democrats would be about the fact that him staying in the race could end up hurting Biden and hurt the Democratic Party writ large. So I think that's a big part of it, too.
Yeah, that's a big concern that he could be damaging, Biden's hopes. But maybe he's just hanging in there because maybe Biden gets sick. Maybe he gets the virus. Maybe he gets sick for other reasons. He's almost 80 years old.
Let me say this to you, that if Joe Biden, for some reason, didn't end up being the Democratic nominee, I think Andrew Cuomo has a better chance of being the nominee than Bernie Sanders.
Well, how is that in that, Bernie has already won a certain amount of delegates, et cetera? I mean, I have no idea how that works.
I would think that if for some reason, I can't imagine it would happen, but if it were to happen, that Biden were to drop out, I would imagine that, he might say, he might endorse some other Democrat, other than Sanders. Again, these are very unlikely scenarios. I don't think any reason to think Biden won't be the nominee. But the point being that, Sanders, the reason why Sanders lost, not just people love Joe Biden, I think that's part of it, but a big part is also people don't like Bernie Sanders. If you look what happened in Super Tuesday in the states afterward, a lot of Democrats were like, we don't want Sanders to be the nominee of the Democratic Party because he's a loser. Not a loser. He is going to lose to Donald Trump. That, I think, is the assumption.
Watch your mouth, Cohen.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not a loser. I didn't mean to say that. For all of the Bernie bros out there, I'm not calling Bernie.
Are they attacking you for this column where are you open with, I can't decide what makes me more sick and tired, Bernie Sanders or being sick and tired of Bernie Sanders? You're such an asshole, Michael.
Yeah, I'm a neoliberal shill. I get that a lot. But I blocked so many of the Bernie bros that I feel like I don't get as much pushback as I used to get. So.
Hey, what do you make of, did you see that Joe Rogan said he'd rather vote for Trump than Joe Biden?
I mean, that says a lot about Joe Rogan, more than it is about Joe Biden, if you ask me.
All right, so you don't want to talk a lot about that, but I know you want to talk.
Look, you might know him better than I do.
I am disappointed in my friend Joe Rogan.
Are you?
Yeah, for sure. Come on.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, Supreme Court, climate change. What else do you need?
But I mean, look what's happening right now. I mean, look at this. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that Donald Trump is going to have the blood of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans on his hands, who are going to die because of his utter incompetence. How anybody can step away from what's happening right now and say, yeah, give that guy 4 more years. Like, what are you, have you lost your mind?
We have to change that phrase from blood in his hands to something about like last breaths, because this horrible disease and what it does to affecting your lungs and respiration. I mean, it's like there's just no doubt that a certain amount of deaths and illnesses could have been prevented had this president led using science, which is not that hard. He just has to trust the scientists that he has available to him. All right, I got to play something for you, and I only saw this because I was reading your Twitter timeline at SpeechBoy71. Okay. This is from the great patriot, the great legal mind and political analyst Jeanine Pirro, who had an excellent guest on her program the great Franklin Graham on play you this because I think you shared this clip, which is, suspect that you even shared it to tweet about it. But hold on.
Given the number of Americans, thousands who've already died, you must get questions like, why would God allow this kind of thing to happen?
Before Franklin Graham answers, Michael, why would God allow this to happen?
I can't even imagine, frankly.
All right. I think I have to put.
No, I got it.
Again.
Because people have not been religious enough, and they have not been God-fearing enough.
Let's see what he says.
Well, I don't think it's God planned for this to happen. It's because of the sin that's in the world, Judge. Man has turned his back on God. We have sinned against him. And we need to ask for God's forgiveness. And that's what Easter's all about. It's about God so loving the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but should have everlasting life. Jesus Christ came to save sinners. He didn't come to condemn the world, but to save the world. And if we put our faith and trust in him, he'll forgive our sins, and he'll heal our hearts, and he'll change the course of our lives.
Okay, so, Michael, I blame you and the Jews.
Sure.
You're a Jew, and I mean, couldn't you do better to accept the Lord as your Savior?
If I were to accept Christ as my Savior, clearly that would be a long way toward, I think, solving this particular problem. Me and all the other Jews, I think if we did that, definitely.
How much are the Jewish people to blame for this? I mean, actually, religious people, including where I live in Rockland County, the Orthodox and Hasidic Jews that are continuing to, get together, as well as these Christian nut jobs that want to keep church open. I mean, some of these religious extremists really are, trying to continue. They're ignoring the science and the advice of government and trying to continue to congregate in their congregations. I mean, what do you say about that? What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, people are going to do dumb stuff, right? People do dumb shit all the time. Like
in America, it seems like in South Korea and Australia and other countries, they're kind of following.
But that's why you need leaders. Why you need people in power to say, no, you can't do that. You're going to hurt people. So this moron in Florida, and I don't use these words lightly, but this moron Ron DeSantis, who waited weeks to announce put in place a stay-at-home or shelter-in-place order. Let people go to the beaches. Let spring break go on. Basically, finally issues an order and then exempts churches. So you've got people, like hundreds of people, 1,000 people getting together in a church, passing along the virus. I mean, if you think it's a threat, then you have to close churches too, obviously. And I just find it so maddening that there are people out there who just political leaders who are putting their own citizens at risk by refusing to put in place tough orders. And I look at someone like, everyone gets credit to Cuomo, and deservedly so. He's done a good job. But look at Gavin Newsom out in California. He got on this thing early. He put in shelter-in-place orders very, very early than anybody else did. And California has a very low number of people who've tested positive, lower than New York, for example. So the leaders, the people who are willing to take these kind of risks and say, look, we need to do this in order to save lives, have saved lives. And these people like DeSantis and other folks who basically dragged their feet or made exceptions or didn't want to piss off the president, people are going to die.
Speaking of great Americans like Ron DeSantis, what is your take on Jared Kushner? He seems to have everything under control. Yeah, take your time.
Well, I think if we're going to blame one Jew for all of this, it would be
all right, one more. Let's see. One more question for Michael Cohen.
Too much? Too soon? Is that okay?
No, I mean, it's you said it, not me. I can't say such a horrible thing. I would never say such an anti-Semitic thing. But yeah, it just to me, it's the most outrageous thing. It has nothing to do with his ethnic background, but everything to do with the fact that he was born to the family he was born to, married the woman he married, and most importantly, was appointed to and given such responsibility by the President of the United States. And I always think about this, Michael, and think nepotism. Nobody likes it. It's not liberal. It's not conservative. You can't appoint if you're a governor or a mayor, much less a president, you can't appoint your children, your son-in-law, your relatives to important positions. You just can't.
You can. And you see the reason why, by the way.
Well, yeah, especially if they're completely unqualified.
Completely unqualified, can't get fired because he's the son-in-law of the president. Absolutely out of his league, out of his element. And I keep reading the article. There's a big article in the Post, Washington Post, I think it was today, that basically looked at all of the problems that happened so far. And one issue that's been going on is that Kushner has his own separate task force, which is giving orders, a request to the CDC and the Health and Human Services that is basically wasting their time. And they should be taking orders from the other task force, the one that's actually in charge of this stuff. I mean, this guy has no idea what he is doing. And it's an embarrassment that he's allowed to do this. And he is like the president. I mean, he's killing people. I hate to say that. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say this, but the president and the people around him who've allowed this crisis to get as bad as it has are allowing people to die. People are going to die in this country who should not have died because of this president and people like Jared Kushner, people around him.
My favorite tweet that I've seen from you and almost anybody, and I really laughed at it. And every time I see it, I laugh at it. And I don't know why. It's your tweet with a picture of a bottle of Maker's Mark filled with rocks, a glass filled with rocks, and it just says, "Come to Papa." And I don't love it. I don't like that much, but it's just like, I imagine it just, everybody has to go to @SpeechBoy71 and see this picture of a bottle of Maker's Mark, which is still mostly full, a glass with ice, it's half full, and it just says, "Come to Papa." And I've seen it like 3 times, and I just keep laughing.
Well, I'm glad I could make you laugh at
Good
that
for
one.
you.
Believe me, I enjoyed that Maker's Mark last night. It was a long day with my kids. I needed that Maker's Mark in a big way.
Yeah, we're all drinking more than usual, and at least we're keeping the liquor stores in business. Michael Cohen, always a pleasure, @SpeechBoy71. Try to get him here over the weekend. Join me on Monday, hopefully regularly. Thank you very much, pal.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Go
Thanks.
subscribe to the Boston Globe. Subscribe to his email newsletter. And
it's $1 for 26 weeks right now. You can't beat it. You got to subscribe.
Follow him on Twitter @SpeechBoy71. Thank you, sir. Get back to teaching your kids.
I will.
Well, my Bernie Sanders supporting friends, and I'm one of those people, might not agree with Michael Cohen's opinion or column, but I always enjoy talking to him. Perhaps I should have challenged him more on some of that, but I don't know. I think he's mostly right on it. If you disagree with me, by all means, let me know. So it was just going to be Paul Rieckhoff and Michael Cohen, but then Barry Ritholtz and I had been texting, and then he called me while I was interviewing Michael Cohen. He FaceTimed me. So I called him back. Barry and I talk a lot. He texts me every morning, early in the morning, and I don't know who else he texts. The guy gets up at like 4 in the morning. And we talk all the time, and that's why he's on the podcast probably once a week. And I said, yeah, let me just press record. And so his wife and he were in the kitchen and making dinner or something, and we had a thorough conversation about a bunch of different things, and I think you might like it. Because I have all these really smart friends because of the show and what I've done with my career, and I always just feel fortunate that I get to have conversations and ask them questions. But the whole idea of the podcast and the fact that I can do it more is, why don't I just tape these conversations I'm having anyway? Yeah, they might act a little bit differently knowing they're going on the record. But I told them I'm hitting record, and, well, here it is, Barry Ritholtz and I on a Sunday night. What kind of cool stuff are you doing?
Mostly, so I can't explain why some tweets blow up and others don't. I just can't give you an answer. But
what are your hot tweets lately? You tweeted that the senator who got caught insider trading was also caught for buying what?
Yeah. So she bought a couple of companies that would benefit from the pandemic after an intelligence briefing. Now, that's not my research. That's not my news. I basically just took somebody else's tweet and somebody else's column and said, oh, people are missing the money shot here. What's important isn't just that she was insider trading. It's that her and her husband bought shares of a company that manufactures personal protective gear. At the same time, she was saying, oh, the Democrats it's a hoax about COVID-19. Now, her husband and her are both fairly wealthy. So it's hard to imagine why their financial financial advisor would be picking individual stocks for them. They should be in a much more conservative portfolio than buying speculative issues. So
this is Senator Kelly Loeffler of Georgia.
Yeah. So I can't tell you why that tweet blew up. Right now it's, 4,000 retweets and 7,000 likes.
Look at you.
I don't get that. So the one I just sent you before, I would love to see that blow up. The dog just lets himself out. It's hilarious. He's like, see ya, I'm out.
I wish I could let myself out. What is the tweet that you just sent me?
What would the outcome have been if Trump were president in earlier periods of U.S. history? During World War II, the Great Depression, the Civil War, 08-09, financial crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, 9/11, the Cold War, the 1918 pandemic. I want to see a TV campaign ad showing this. And that was 20 minutes ago, and that's starting to rant.
That's such a rough hypothetical.
Yeah, totally. I love those hypotheticals. What's the counterfactual? What's the counterfactual if Trump was president during World War II? So Twitter has a wicked, wicked sense of humor. People on Twitter are really hilarious. So some guy named Don't Panic responds, Adolf and I are great friends. He's a strong leader. I sent him a letter. That's pretty funny.
Adolf
and I are great friends.
My good friend Adolf has just received a letter. It's very kind. You tweeted earlier, I think this is interesting. Family budget question. How much less are you spending than normal? Are you saving? ?
Yeah. Well, we've been trying to figure out how to get money to people in our community that you used to interact with every day. So I made a list. I did a poll early in the week that also got a huge response. So we occasionally are ordering from Instacart and Peapod. Food is showing up. And the lawn guys come by and do some work. But other than that, we're not going out to eat. We're not traveling. I'm not taking tennis lessons. I'm not going to physical therapy. I'm not doing any travel. I'm not buying theater tickets, concert tickets. I'm not traveling for work. I'm basically not, I added Disney Plus. It's $6.99 a month. That's pretty much it.
Why?
So
Was there a particular show?
Mandalorian. And we added CBS All Access to watch Picard, which was pretty interesting if you're a Star Trek fan.
What else? What changed last? So I mean, you bring that up though, just to point out how little you're stimulating the economy.
And I'm making an effort. I've called a bunch of contractors who we've worked with in the past and said, hey, you guys looking for work? What can you do? Like the guys who put on our roof 2 years ago. I'm like, hey, are you guys busy? What are you doing? Is there anything you could do around the house? They're like, yeah, we could drain the drains on your roof. Great, come do that.
But are you're doing that because you feel bad that you're not spending money on things that you normally would, and you're not helping?
It's not that I feel bad. It's that I wanna help whoever I can help. So the guy who cuts my hair, I reached out to. I haven't heard back from him. He might have been visiting. I know he had travel planned. I wonder if he got stuck outside of the United States. He's got family overseas. The woman who does my wife's hair, the people who do her nails. We have a housekeeper who comes once a week. We reached out to them. Our dog walker / house sitter. Like, we're trying to find ways to get money to people who need help.
Very thoughtful.
I don't know. So.
I feel like that's your wife's idea. I feel like that's your wife's idea.
Honey?
No.
Tell him.
No.
All right, Wendy.
I brought it up. I'm like, how can we help these people? The local restaurants, and I have to tell you, as Long Island becomes a hotspot, I don't want to order food from a restaurant where I can't manage the risk there. I get a grocery delivery. It sits in my garage. Everything that is non-perishable just sits there and cools off for 48 hours. Everything else that goes in the freezer or the fridge gets wiped down with disinfectant wipes and alcohol. It either goes in the freezer or the refrigerator.
You wipe down every corner of the surface of with a wipe?
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I haven't been doing that much. And
So-
when I
so-
tried to do that yesterday, and my entire family attacked me,
All right. Well,
called me
you know,
crazy.
either you are going to be diligent or you're not. I'm older than you. My wife is taking certain meds. You don't know what the side effects are.
Right.
It's weird when the side effect on the thing that you look up says may or may not cause immunosuppressant effects. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? So rather than I would rather err on the side of caution than have to deal with some sort of situation where the outcome is out of your hands and completely negative.
Are you exercising during this time, Ritholtz?
You know, I started, and then this week I got crazy busy. So this week, I mean, we go for a walk whenever it's nice out. We take the dogs out, but I have not been as fastidious as I know you have. I'm going to start calling you Mr. Six-Pack soon.
That's right. That is right. That's my new nickname. All right. Let me ask you about Trump, the president's performance. How do you think he did this past week?
So I have no ability to judge this objectively for two reasons. The first reason is the bar is so low. It's hard to look at this and see it as anything other than a total shit show.
Mm-hmm.
So even with that bar so low, it's like, all right, so he didn't get up there and vomit on everybody. Are we supposed to applaud that? I mean, there are swaths of the country that says
even the media,
right?
It's like,
look,
oh my God, he's acting like a president.
Right. When really he's just not doing as poorly as he normally does. Somehow he deserves credit for that. That's number one. And number two, there's just no other way to look at this other than this is the most inept president in history. Max Boot, who has been a never-Trumper for a long time and has refused to say that Trump is the worst president ever because, you know, you need some objectivity and some time and some history and distance. You know, you can't say he's Buchanan. You can't say he's, you know, you sometimes need a half a century to go by. His column in the Washington Post today is worst president ever.
Is that right?
And,
a lot of people measured Bush and said, you know, a lot of people said Trump still isn't as bad as Bush because of all the blood that Bush has on his hands because of the Iraq War. But now people are saying that Trump's ineptitude and lack of taking action and leadership, he's going to have hundreds of thousands of Americans deaths on his hands.
Yeah, a couple 100,000, right. I mean, how many people died post? So 9/11, you can't completely blame Bush for, but clearly asleep at the switch and much more worried about. Remember, like a week beforehand, he gave a Oval Office address to discuss stem cell research while ignoring all the hair on fire things. That plus the war of choice, that's an era of commission. So he's responsible in many ways for lots and lots of people dying in Iraq. But what's the total number of American deaths in Iraq?
Between 4,000 and 5,000, I think.
Yep. And even if you want to be extreme and blame him for all of 9/11, which I think is probably excessive, so 10,000 deaths. You know, as much as I thought he was hapless, he did some good things. He really was very helpful to fighting AIDS in Africa. People don't realize that.
Wow, that's about the only good thing. 4,424 total deaths, almost 32,000 wounded in action in Iraq.
And by the way, during the Bush administration, I despised him.
Yeah.
But now, under Trump, I'm looking at one of the things trending today is the 2005 ABC News had an article about Bush's obsession with pandemics. Obsessed, not concerned, obsessed.
Really?
And did a lot of, I'll send you this link, did a lot of things to fight pandemics and make sure the U.S. would not get unaware and surprised.
Wow, I'm looking at George W. Bush in 2005.
Yeah.
If we wait for a pandemic to appear, it will be too late to prepare. How about my impression?
But that's my wife. She turned her head, snapped to attention as soon as you did that. She's like, "Wow, that's pretty good."
Hey, Wendy, what are you making over there? I hear a lot of noise in the background.
Stuffed cabbage. We've been cooking a ton. I made baked ziti, like 5-pound baked ziti last night. We're going to be eating that for Dave. And she's making a stuffed cabbage. We're going to be celebrating the holidays, so we'll be eating that for.
I used to call Jeb a stuffed cabbage.
Very good.
Very good.
So we like to make gassy foods as an early warning. If we lose your sense of smell, it means it's a sign of coronavirus. So we've been cooking cabbage and
having
beans, hot dogs and beans.
Speaking of gassy foods, I avoid them as much as possible.
So your buddy, what is his name? TJ, who does the Trump imitation.
J.L. Cohen.
JL, yeah. Trump and Bush should have had a conversation. That could have been hilarious.
Oh, yeah, maybe we should do that. That's not a bad idea.
So crazy stuff is going on. It just doesn't – the news flow is just relentless.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop.
Well, what do you think about – we didn't even talk about what you generally write and talk about in our expert on. What do you think about the economy? I mean, aren't we going to see a complete collapse of our economy? Aren't we completely fucked, Ritholtz?
Dude, we already have. We've been in a recession for a couple of weeks. There's no doubt about that. And it's only going to get worse. I did some research today. At the peak of the Great Depression, the unemployment rate, according to an after-the-fact analysis the Bureau of Labor Statistics did in the 40s, they didn't exist in the 20s and 30s. It was created by FDR, was 24.9%. Let's call that 25%. 1 out of every 4 working people were unemployed. There is a real chance that the same thing or worse is going to happen in response to the coronavirus, only it won't take years. It will be a matter of weeks. We're 2 weeks into this event, and you had new unemployment claims, almost 4 million 2 weeks ago and over 6 million this week. Essentially, that's 10 million in 2 weeks. The entire financial crisis, which was 2 years, 3 years, if you include the early real estate collapse, was barely 9 million jobs lost. So an entire financial crisis worth of job losses in 2 weeks. The good news is those job losses are likely.
Good Lord, what happened?
So sorry. Apologies.
What is it? Is everybody okay? Was that the cabbage?
How many times have I told you to keep the safety on the gun? What are you doing there? I almost hit my head off. Jesus Christ. So anyway, most of these jobs are going to come back, and hopefully it won't take as long post-crisis this time as it did last time. But
end of 2021?
I would hope so. It really depends on how soon we flatten the curve, how quickly we get on top of this. When is the peak deaths? I saw that we've already had 9,000 U.S. deaths. That's a crazy number. That's a shocking number, and that's going to go much, much higher. So,
what are the industries that are actually doing really well? Grocery stores?
Yeah, they're doing well. When you look at any of the logistics and delivery companies like UPS and
FedEx,
UPS, they're pretty busy. If you look at some of the healthcare companies, they're doing okay. Especially the ones that have been ramping up production of things like masks, and Abbott Labs is cranking out this new test that gives you coronavirus results in 5 minutes instead of hours.
Oh wow,
that's pretty impressive, and there's a ton of companies that are doing well. Essentially, it's people who are considered essential services. Farmers aren't not growing their food anymore. They're continuing to do that. All of your utilities, what they're losing in electric bills from work, they're probably making up in electric bills from residences. But, when the market drops 35%, that's a big enough downdraft that all the stock prices go down with it. So when we're talking about these companies, it means that their revenues aren't dropping that much. Walmart is doing deliveries or what they call touchless curbside pickup. Target also. So those are a few of the retail companies. Peapod, which is owned by ShopRite, and Instacart is another one. They're hiring 100,000 people each. It's astonishing. Amazon is going to come out of this better than ever. They're so essential. When you look at Amazon, they're integral to the U.S. consumer. It's astonishing how significant they are. There's a run of companies that are going to come out of this. What's fascinating is the changes that are going to be imposed or that are going to take place afterwards because the things we learned during this lockdown.
Like what?
All right, so you and I both have talked about this. On the summer, I work from home on Fridays. I don't have to schlep into the city. It's really the day ends after lunch. Why even bother? The ability for all these people to work from home, I think a lot of people are no longer going to be going into the office, or at least not going into the office full time. I could see having people platoon and share an office where one person comes in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the other person comes in Tuesday, Thursday, because you don't need to be in the city. If there's a meeting, you Zoom or Skype it and or FaceTime it. You do that. The necessity of, like it's the 1950s, going to the train, leaving your car there, getting on a train, going into the city or commuting by car to your place of work and spending 8 hours there. Like that's something that developed a century ago and is completely unnecessary in the modern world.
Yeah, I don't know why we needed a pandemic to come to that conclusion.
Well, it's not that we're going to radically change with the past. That's not what's taken place. All it's doing is accelerating what would have happened eventually, right? Eventually, a lot of these retail stores are going to go out of business because I wrote in 2008, America is over-retailed. We have, something like 20 square feet of retail per person on a per capita basis versus 7 square feet in UK and 4 square feet in Japan. We have far too much real estate. I'm trying to remember those numbers. That's a ballpark off the top of my head. So this is going to accelerate that. This is going to accelerate the remote working situation. I think this is going to, if we're smart, and it really depends on who wins the 2020 presidential election, the concept of just-in-time manufacturing and inventory supply chains for essential services, that shit has to get tossed out.
What does that mean? I don't know what that is.
Okay, so in the old days, you know why your grocery store is out of toilet paper and sanitizing wipes and Lysol and Purell? Because they don't have any warehouse. The computerized system allows them to get a delivery just before they need it. So rather than tie up capital with non-perishable groceries and supplies, instead of having like a 90-day supply of stuff, they have a 5-hour supply of stuff, and it arrives just as they run out of it.
Right.
And from a capital perspective, it's more efficient. From a societal-wide position, in the event of a pandemic, you're screwed. If you go back and look at some of the choices that were made in the early 2010s, there's a national strategic reserve of medical supplies. In a fight between the Tea Party and the Obama administration, the newly elected 2010 conservative congressman, mostly from the Tea Party, refused to authorize money to fill that up. It was thought of as a waste of time and money. That sort of attitude, and their whole thing was all about budget deficits and fiscal constraints. I disagree with that philosophy. I don't know how much of that position was legitimate and how much of it was just, well, we have a black president and therefore we're not going to cooperate with them.
Right.
I've heard arguments on both sides. I don't have an affirmative opinion on it. But regardless of why, we know what the outcome is. There is an insufficient emergency supply of the N95 masks, of surgical gloves, of ventilators, of a whole run of things that should exist between FEMA and CDC that doesn't. And making that worse is the fact that many senior positions in CDC, FEMA, and other essential parts of the government have been unfilled.
Right.
If you haven't read the book The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis, that explains the entire transition period from Obama to Trump and how Trump essentially, let's just call it, brought a different philosophy of government, it's just astonishing. Now, Lewis focused on things like the Department of Energy and how it maintains and the safe stockpile of our nuclear weapons, how it maintains all those weapons and keeps track of them and doesn't let them, any of those, get lost.
Yeah, but equally as important are antibiotics.
Go down the list. It's
ventilators.
There are all these different things that resulted from a new, rabidly anti-government group, like conspiracy theories, deep state, making the Tea Party look like a bunch of, school kids. This is a whole next level stuff. And the result of it is we've been incredibly unprepared for this event. So
before I get off the phone with you, give me a tip as to one writer, source, person, thing you've heard that you've been impressed with, a new follow. Anybody impressing you during this time? Writing, journalist, Twitter?
So in general, the Washington Post has just been on fire. So I do my morning reads every day. I give people 10 links to read.
Today, Sundays was like there was like a positive and a negative reads. I like that you did that.
Can I tell you something? It's so on Friday afternoons, I do a succinct summation of week's events, and I show these are the 7 or 10 positive things that happen. Here are the 7 or 10 negative things. It forces you to be even-handed. I'm all about behavioral biases and cognitive issues, and doing that every week forces me to say, well, there's some positives and some negatives. It's not all one side or the other. What started happening is I made my Sunday reads more policy-oriented. The Saturday weekend reads are longer form. The Sunday, I'm like, let me push all my political policy stuff here to Sunday, because that's the sort of Sunday morning talk shows. And it's a good place for it. And what started happening is it just became an endless list of corruption and ineptness and political haplessness and just, nobody wants to read every week. Trump is an incompetent idiot. Film at 11. I mean, it's just boring at a certain point. So what I did was I'm going to break this into two pieces. I'm going to put all the Trump sucks pieces after the jump. So if you don't want to look at it, you could just scroll right past it. But I'm going to use the Sunday reads to start your week as a list of upbeat news, helpful hints, things that will be of value to somebody as they negotiate through this lockdown and this pandemic crisis. Because I consume so much news and I go through so much media every day, it really creates an opportunity for me to be a little bit of a clearinghouse. And the discipline of keeping it to 10 forces you to pick and choose. Hey, every now and then the 11th one is great. I could always roll that over to the next day. But forcing yourself to say, these are the best 10 things I've seen over the past 24 hours is really interesting.
I love it. I love it. I also love my morning text that I get from you. I love you. What time do you get up in the morning?
4:35.
Every morning, 4:30.
I don't use an alarm clock whenever my brain says, all right, asshole,
He's
get
like
up.
Jack
We got
Reacher.
work to do.
Barry Ritholtz, at Ritholtz. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
And thank you. That's it. Barry Ritholtz, Michael Cohen, Paul Rieckhoff, and always a special thanks to my old man, Chisel D, Chuck Dominick. To all of you subscribing on Patreon, I can't thank you enough. And to Kevin K. who says, ever since you started posting daily podcasts a few weeks ago, my wife and I have been listening to you each evening after we put the kids to bed. It's our fireside chat. It's our normal, regular activity. It's our together time. We have wine or beer and work on a puzzle while listening to your show. My wife is a doctor and I'm a teacher here in Philadelphia. Aside from raising and protecting 2 young kids, a 5-year-old and a 6-month-old during this time of social distancing, our secondary stressors come for our jobs, which both remain unpredictable and turbulent in very different ways. So I want to thank you for checking in on both experts and everyday Americans during this time. It's a valuable source of good information and a connection for the two of us. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Kevin, and Kevin's awesome wife. I can't thank you enough. And all of those of you that are paying on Patreon with a paid subscription, very special thanks to you. But I've got to go post this podcast, and you have probably something to do as well. Crazy times, everybody. Keep in touch. Keep close. Email me. DM me. Call me. Connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.